Hello, everyone. This is the Basics of Excel Session 2, sponsored by TechBridge and JPMorgan Chase. TechBridge breaks the cycle of generational poverty through the innovative use of technology to transform nonprofit and community impact. We work in 4 pillars: hunger relief, homeless support, social justice, and workforce development. In the workforce development pillar, we're really working to close the digital equity gap with training and employment. Our agenda today will be to continue on with those basics of Excel. We'll go through data tables, basic formulas and functions, cell references, conditional formatting, pivot table introductions, and a couple of shortcut keys with a leave behind so that you can practice throughout your use of Excel. So starting off with data or with tables. Hello, I'm an Excel table. This is what a table looks like in Excel. So we are going to use our workbook to create a table and see all of the features that it has. A table is a specifically designed area of a worksheet. Excel gives it special properties that make certain operations easier and that help prevent errors. The purpose of the table is really to enforce some structure around the data. We can see that we're able to format the table really easily. We have these drop downs, which we'll see what those do in just a moment. And we can have these totals that really give us some powerful summaries of the data. There are several areas that make up the table: the header row, filter buttons, the data body, and the total row, which is in parentheses here because it's kind of optional. You can show it or you can choose not to. And we also have the resizing handle on the bottom right. So here is an image that shows you where everything is. So we have our header row. That's where we have our date, weekday amount, account type. And we'll see this example in just a second. We have our data body. This is where all of the information is held. We have this filter button here. Those are those drop-down arrows next to each header. So how do we insert a table? So first, we do want to make sure that the range doesn't contain any completely blank rows or columns. If it does, we just want to delete those to make sure that our data range is contiguous. We'll select any cell within the range. We'll go to the Insert tab on our ribbon. Then we'll go to the Tables group, and then we'll select the Table command. Or we can just press Control-T. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So if you navigate to your workbook for this session, you'll see we have a bank data 4119 sheet. And we can click on it on that bottom sheet bar. So we'll select any cell within the range. Oh, let's make sure. Okay, we do not have any blank rows or columns, so we're okay. We'll select any cell within the range. On our ribbon, we'll go to the Insert tab. We'll find the Tables group on the far left, and then we'll click the Table command. When we do that, it says, where is the data for your table? So we'll just make sure that that green outline is around all of our data, and it is. Excel's pretty smart that way. And we want to make sure that if our table does have headers, that we have this option checked. We do have headers, so we'll have it checked. And then we'll click OK. So we can see that automatically the format of my table has changed. I now have those filter buttons in my header row. Once the table is inserted, the Table Tools Design contextual tab of the ribbon appears when the active cell is within the table. So if I click inside of my table, I have this Table Contextual tab that pops up. And this gives us a lot of information about the table. The first is the name. So if we wanted to, we could change the name of this table to be Bank Data 41 for the 1st of April. Or you can leave it as Table 2. We've got some options here. Convert to range simply means that it will take away those special table properties and just change it back to a regular range, a regular part of the spreadsheet. We have some table style options. So we can choose to not show the header row. We can choose to check or uncheck that total row. And we can choose some other options with formatting. So banded rows, do we want the first column to have special formatting? Do we want the last column to have special formatting? Do we want banded columns? We can also choose to remove those filter buttons. And then finally, we can choose the style, can change the color, the layout. Again, I've said this in some previous sessions, but just make sure that as you're choosing your style, you make sure that you're not taking away from what the data is trying to tell you. So just choose a style that makes everything easy to read. So again, here's that table tab. We just saw how we can insert a total row, change the table style, rename the table, and more. So the most powerful, in my opinion, the most powerful piece or function of tables is using those filter buttons. So if we click on a filter button in one of the column headers, it will pull up this dialog box. We can choose one of the sort commands. So we can do ascending, descending. Right now I have by color, but the exact command will vary depending on the type of data in the column. We can also use the filter options to display only the rows that meet certain conditions and hide the other rows. So if I am selecting the filter button on my account type column, I can choose to show only certain types of accounts and hide the others. So let's see that work in real time. I'll click on the account type drop down. I can choose to sort by ascending. So it will put all of those account types in alphabetical order from A to Z. Descending, alphabetical order from Z to A. By color, right now we don't have any special coloring, so that doesn't apply. We can choose to hide any of our types of accounts. So as you're working with data, this may be a helpful tool to help organize and really see what's going on with your data without a lot of work upfront. The next part of our session today, we'll talk about basic formulas and functions. So what is a function? I want you to take a moment, pause the video if you need, but think about how you would describe what a function is and maybe what types of functions you know. So hopefully you got some good answers. Let's go through it. So a formula in Excel is a special code entered into a cell. It always begins with an equal sign, and it can contain mathematical operators like plus, minus, multiplication, division, and exponents, cell references, values, text, or even other worksheet functions. Formulas perform some type of calculation and return a result that's displayed in the cell. So we can kind of think of this as like a calculator. A function, on the other hand, is a predefined formula. They allow us to perform calculations that are difficult or even impossible using only mathematical operators. So really what a function is after doing the same formula over and over, the creators of Excel said, you know what, we can program this into Excel to make it easier for everyone and more efficient. So let's see the example between a formula and a function and why functions are so powerful. So if I wanted to find the average of 10 test scores on the function sheet using mathematical operators, so let's go ahead and do that. On my function sheet, to find the average of 10 numbers, I need to add them all up, and then I need to divide by the number that I have, which is 10. So if I go through this using operations, I'll start with an equal sign. I know I need to add them all up and then divide by 10. So I'm going to use parentheses to help group those addition values. So I'll click the first cell, plus the second cell, plus, and I'm just using my keyboard to type in plus, and then I'm clicking on each of the cells. I'll do the same until I have all of the cells added together. Oh, too many pluses. Then we'll close our parentheses. So this is telling Excel to add up all of the 10 values. And then we'll type divided by 10. Then you'll press enter or return, and that'll give you the final answer of 74. You can always click back into the cell and then look up in the formula bar, and it will tell you exactly what your function or your formula is. And if you click inside of your formula bar, it will highlight the cells that you've used. So hopefully you can see that was a little bit tedious, right? And we only had 10 scores. Think about if we had 100 scores, it would take forever. So we can use a function. Now in Excel, functions have a name, and the name is often what you would expect it to be. So for average, the function is equals average. And as we start typing, it gives us some suggestions down below. So I've used average recently, so it shows up under most recently used, but if you haven't, it will still show up below. If you double click on the function name, it will insert this open parenthesis for you, and then it tells you what it wants you to input. These are called our arguments. So right now, our arguments are to input all of the numbers that I want to take the average of. And the real power of functions is that I don't have to click on each of these test scores one at a time. Instead, I can select the entire range. So from A2 to A11, all I did was click in A2, and then I held down my mouse button and moved all the way down to A11. You could also type A2 colon A11. Close my parentheses and then press enter, and we get 74, which was the same result we got doing it by hand, kind of more in a traditional mathematical way. So hopefully this is a simple example, but it helps to illustrate the power of functions. Here are some additional basic functions. They all start with an equal sign, followed by the function name, and then the argument or arguments inside of parentheses. So I want you to take a moment, go ahead and pause the video and fill out the sum, the standard deviation.s, the count of A1 to A11, the count A of A1 to A11, the max, and the min. So now that you've done those on your own, I will go ahead and walk through them as well. So for the sum, I'll type in equals sum, parentheses, and you can put it in all caps or you can put it in lowercase, it doesn't matter. Then I'll select my cells, A2 to A11. Press enter, you should get 740. For standard deviation.s, you should get 20.5750658. For the count of A1 to A11, we get 10. For count A of A1 to A11, we get 11. Now, this is an interesting difference that I want to draw for you. What is the difference between count and count A? Count counts the number of cells that contain a number, whereas count A counts the cells that are non-empty. So when I select A1 to A11, in that range, there are only 10 numbers, so count returns a 10, but there are 11 non-empty cells, which is why count A returns 11. For our maximum, we have 98, and for our minimum, we have 29. Now, I want to tell you something really cool. Maybe you have a more complicated function and you're not sure what the function name is. If you navigate to your ribbon on the Formulas tab, you can find all of the possibilities of functions in Excel. And there's also a command called insert function. So on the far left, if you click on it, if you're on a Mac, it will pull up this pane on the far right. If you're on a PC, it might pull up a dialog box in the middle. But what we can do here is we can search for some commonly used functions. So for example, count. I can see all of the different types of counts. And when you click on the function name in our formula builder, it gives us a description. What does count do? It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. It will also give us the syntax. So what do we need to enter as those arguments? So anytime you're not sure of what the function may be, you can use this formula builder to help you search. Another great thing we can do on the formulas tab is use the formula auditing group. We can trace precedence and trace dependence to figure out which cells are used for each function. So first, let's go through trace precedence. This will show an arrow that indicates what cells affect the value of the currently selected cell. So we're going to select cell C5, and then we'll click the trace precedence command. So C5, I've clicked, my active cell is now on C5. And I'll find the command on my ribbon under the formulas tab called trace precedence. When I click that button, it's showing me exactly what cells are funneling into that cell. So C5 is being affected by cells A2 to A11. And that makes sense because those are the ones that we called to use that function. The next command we'll look at is trace dependence. This will show an arrow that indicates which cells are affected by the value of the currently selected cell. So on the function sheet, let's select cell A2, and then we'll click the trace dependence command. Before we do that, I do want to let you know that there is a remove arrows command. So if we've used trace precedence or trace dependence previously, those arrows may still be there. If we want to get rid of them, we can just simply select the remove arrows command. So I'll select cell A2, and then I'll click the trace dependence button. So now this is pointing to every other cell on this worksheet that uses A2 inside of its function or formula. This can be helpful if someone else has created a workbook that you're now receiving to help kind of see what's going on and what has already been done in the workbook. The next section of our session today, we'll go through cell referencing. In Excel, the row and column references change when you copy the formula to another cell because the references are actually offsets from the current row and column. So let's do some experimentation here. On the functions sheet, let's type equals A1 into cell A15. Then we're going to copy cell A15 into A16 through A25. And let's see what happens. So on our function sheet, let's go ahead and remove those arrows. Let's type equals A1 into cell A15. I'll press enter on my keyboard, and it's calling cell A1. Test scores, that makes sense. So now we're going to copy cell A15. So I'm going to use my keyboard, Command or Control C, and I'm going to paste it into cells A16 through A25. And I'm going to do it one at a time. You could do it all at once, but I want us to kind of see what's happening here. So before I do so, think about what may happen. What will show up when I paste? So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut, Control or Command V, as in volleyball. So I'll press that, I get 85. I'll paste below that, I get 91. And I'll continue to paste all the way through to A25. So what has happened here? Well, let's take a look. If I look in my formula bar, I see that A15 is calling A1, A16 is calling or referencing A2. And as I move down, I'm going through A3, A4, A5, A6, all the way down to A11. So when I copy paste cell references down, left, right, the cell reference will move down, left, right with it. What if we don't want that to happen? What if I want to copy and paste this and have test scores show up? We can use what's called an absolute cell reference. An absolute cell reference always refers to a cell in a specific location. If the position of the cell that contains the formula changes, the absolute value remains the same. We use a $ to indicate the constant row or column. So let's see what happens when we introduce those dollar signs. On our function sheet, let's type $A $1 equals $A $1 into cell B15. Then we'll copy that cell B15 into B16 through B25. So in cell B15, I'm going to type equals $A $1. And we do need both of the dollar signs because we want to fix the row A, or the column A, and the row 1. Press enter, I get test scores. So now I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it into B16 through B25, and I'm going to do it all at once. So I've selected B16 all the way down to B25, and I'm going to paste using Control or Command V. So now as I move down, the cell reference is not changing. It's continuing to call or reference cell A1. So as we're copying and pasting, while we've used functions and formulas, it's really important that we pay attention to this and make sure that things don't go amiss as we copy and paste. We also have something called a mixed cell reference. These have either an absolute column and a relative row. So we have that dollar sign in front of A, or an absolute row and a relative column. So we have the dollar sign in front of 1. As you use Excel, you may run into mixed cell references, so just be on the lookout. Next, we'll go through conditional formatting. Conditional formatting allows us to do things like color cells based on a certain condition or criteria. So to apply our conditional formatting, we'll select the cells we'd like to format. On the Home tab, we'll locate the Styles group, and we should see a conditional formatting command. When we click that, a menu will appear with the formatting options. So let's do an example. Using the test scores list on the function sheet, let's try the following. Let's try and highlight the scores above 80% in green. So I will select the test scores. On the Home tab of my ribbon, I'll find the Styles group, and I'll look for the command that says conditional formatting. Now I want to highlight the scores above 80% in green. So looking through this, it looks like highlight cells rules will work. Above 80%, that would be greater than. So now it gives us this new formatting rule dialog box. We want to format only cells that contain a cell value that is greater than, and we can change it if we wanted to, but we want greater than 80. And then we can choose how to format it. There are a couple of defaults: light red, yellow fill, green fill. You can also use a custom format if you wanted to color beyond those options. But we want green, so we'll go ahead and select that. I'll click OK, and now we can see that all of our scores above 80 have been highlighted in green. Number 2, highlight scores below 60 in red. So I'll select my test scores. I'll go to conditional formatting, highlight cells rules. This time I'm going to choose less than. I want to format only the cells that contain cell values less than 60, and I want to fill those with red. I'll click OK. And now we can see that any scores less than 60 have been highlighted in red. There are a lot of other different types of formatting, and I encourage you to kind of explore and see what happens. So we have things like color scales. So if I click the color scales, what it's doing is it's finding the largest value and putting it in dark green, the lowest value in red, and then kind of making a cool to warm scale, kind of like a stoplight. I can also use icon sets. Those give us kind of the scores that are in the green, those in the yellow, and those in the red. We can use data bars to kind of show us, you know, up to the maximum, how close is it, right? So there are a lot of different options here in conditional formatting. I encourage you to kind of explore and figure them out on your own. The last section we'll talk about today is an introduction to pivot tables. So what is a pivot table? A pivot table is a dynamic summary report generated from a database, usually in the form of a table. What's really great about pivot tables is that they're interactive. They allow you to rearrange the information in almost any way imaginable, insert special formulas that perform new calculations, and create groupings of summary items. So we're going to take a look at the bank data sheet in our workbook. I want you to take a minute and just ask yourself a few questions. What information is contained in this sheet? What questions do you have? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Go ahead and pause the video, think about these questions, and when you're ready, go ahead and click play. So let's take a look at the data. The data consists of a month's worth of new account information for a 3-branch bank. The table contains 712 rows, and each row represents a new account opened at the bank. We have a date column where our dates are April 1st all the way through the end of April. We have the weekday, the amount of money that was deposited when the account was opened, what type of account it was, whether that be an IRA, which is an individual retirement account, a CD or certificate of deposit, which is the type of savings account, a checking account or a savings account. Column E is opened by. So was the account opened by a normal teller or was it opened by the new accounts manager? The branch, our 3 branches are Central, North County, and West Side. And then whether the account was opened by an existing or new customer. Some questions that you might ask are, which day of the week accounts for the most deposits? Or maybe how many accounts were opened at each branch? We can answer both of these questions and more using pivot tables. So let's talk about how to insert a pivot table. We'll select any cell in our range. We'll navigate to the Insert tab of the ribbon, find the Tables group, and then select the Pivot Table command. This will pull up the Create Pivot Table dialog box, where we'll identify a location for the pivot table. And we'll see in a minute, there's going to be 2 options. We're going to go with the new worksheet for now. After we do that, we'll set up the layout of the pivot table. So let's follow these steps. First, select any cell in our range. Doesn't matter which cell. Then on our ribbon on the Insert tab, we'll find the Tables group. Yours may be a drop-down, or if your window is a little bigger, you may not have that drop-down at all. Whether you use the drop-down or not, go ahead and find that command or button called Pivot Table. Once you click the Pivot Table button, it'll pull up this dialog box. In the top half of the table, it's asking us to choose the data we want to analyze. Because our cursor, our active cell, was inside of this table range, Excel has guessed that this is the data we want to use, and it's correct. In the bottom half of this dialog box, you can see where it's asking us where we want to place the pivot table. We can choose to put it on a new worksheet or on an existing worksheet. Let's insert on a new worksheet for now. Once you've selected your options, click OK. Excel will create a new pivot table or a new sheet with the pivot table on that sheet. On the right-hand side of your Excel window, you should see this Pivot Table Fields box. If you don't see it, you can right-click inside of your pivot table area and hide or show the pivot or the field list. We can take these fields, which are really just the columns from our original table, and we can drag and drop them into any of these 4 areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. So let's focus on answering that first question. Which day of the week accounts for the most deposits? To answer this question, we can drag the weekday field into the rows area to start. So I'll take weekday and I'm going to click and drag it down to the rows area. As I do that, you'll notice that your pivot table automatically changes to show the days of the week. Next, let's drag the amount field into the values area. That will populate the sum of the amounts for each day of the week. If we're asking the question of the most deposits, that's not really the sum. That would be which day of the week accounts for the most money deposited, right? But if we want to know the most number of deposits, we need to change the sum to a count. To change the sum of amount to a count of amount, we're going to right-click any of the values in the pivot table and find the option in that menu that says Summarize Values By. And we're going to change that drop down to a count. So in my pivot table, I'll right-click any of those values. I'll find the option that says Summarize Values By. Right now it's a sum. Let's change it to count. Now I can see which day of the week has the most deposits, Friday, and which day of the week has the least amount of deposits, Saturday. You'll notice that Sunday is missing from this table, and that's because Sunday wasn't a part of our original data set. And the reason for that is because banks are closed on Sundays. So let's actually go back and let's answer that second question that we had. How many accounts were opened at each branch? So I want you to take a moment and try to create a pivot table that shows how many accounts were opened at each branch. Pause the video. When you come back, we will take a look. To determine how many accounts were opened at each branch, let's insert a new pivot table. We'll go back to our bank data sheet, ensure that any cell inside of our range is selected, Insert Tables Pivot Table. This time, instead of inserting onto a new worksheet, let's insert onto an existing worksheet. When we click this radio button for existing worksheet, Excel is asking us where we want to place the pivot table. I'm going to navigate to that sheet 1 that was created earlier. Now I have to click a cell on the sheet where I want the pivot table to go. So I'll click on cell D3 or D2. Click OK, and the pivot table is inserted. So how many accounts were opened at each branch? To answer that question, I'll drag branch to rows, and I'll drag amount to values. And just like before, it's asking about how many, not how much. So how many is really a count. So I'm going to change these values. Instead of being summarized by a sum, I'll have them summarized by count. So now I know exactly how many accounts were opened at each of the 3 branches. As you continue to work in Excel, it's really important that you practice. So I recommend going back to the bank data and creating a pivot table that answers another question that you have. You can use rows, but you can also use columns. As you drag different fields to rows and columns, you can create a one-way table or a two-way table. Finally, I want to leave you with some shortcut keys. I'll click through a couple of the most important, but I'll also leave a link for you to get a downloadable shortcut kind of cheat sheet. And this is really helpful for you to print out and have next to you as you're working through Excel. You can always use your mouse, but the more you can use your keyboard and use those shortcuts, the more efficient you'll be. I pulled out the ones that I thought might be most relevant to you, but more shortcuts can be found at wallstreetprep.com/knowledge/excel-shortcuts. On this page as well, there's a downloadable version of these shortcuts and more. Thanks for your attention, and I hope that it was helpful. Have a good one.